In this episode of Everyday Movie Recap, we'll talk about the 2023 film Killer of the Flower Moon. The Osage elders are doing an eerie ceremony inside a community hut, after which the three elders bury a wrapped piece of ceremonial pipe in the earth. Later, the Osage people rejoiced after discovering oil on their territory, which quickly provided prosperity for the Osage nation, making them the luckiest and richest people in the world per capita. As the Osage tribe grows in wealth per capita, the U.S. Congress deems them incompetent and establishes legislation forcing the appointment of guardians to handle their money. Ernest Burkhart arrives in Oklahoma after returning from World War I and is met by Henry Roan. Ernest is subsequently brought to his uncle, William King Hale, widely known as the King of the Osage Hills, by Henry. William is regarded as a friend and supporter of the Osage people due to his compassionate character and profound affection for them. Ernest and King had a talk regarding his military experiences. When Ernest's brother, Byron, enters the room, their conversation is cut short. King cautions Ernest not to cause any difficulties because, in addition to being a successful businessman, he also served as deputy sheriff and wanted to avoid any unneeded conflicts. He also gives Ernest a book on Osage culture and history and encourages him to read it. Despite their success, members of the Osage tribe in the United States are inexplicably murdered with no inquiry, and the deaths were frequently labeled as suicides. Molly, an affluent full-blood Osage, talked about how much money her family had lately spent. When she asked to use it for her diabetes medicine, the man refused, insisting that her family guardian be present before she could use her own money. While working as a cab driver, Ernest met Molly, who became a regular customer. King saw this as an opportunity to counsel Ernest on whether or not to pursue a love relationship with Molly. Ernest takes his advice and gets closer to her over time. Ernest and Byron had also been involved in armed robberies targeting the Osage population. They then used the stolen money to gamble. Ernest and Molly became acquainted, and a romance formed between them. Ernest and Molly married in the traditional Osage manner when their relationship got more serious. During the celebration, King consoled a bereaved female Osage member who had been ill and later died. While the Osage community mourns their friend's death, King convinces Ernest to take advantage of the situation, claiming that if more of Molly's family members died, more money would eventually flow to Molly. If Molly died, all of her fortune would legally go to Ernest. Ernest and Molly already had children when an unexpected event occurred. Molly's mother, Lizzie, notices an owl by the window and warns Molly that seeing the owl means their family is doomed because of Molly, implying that marrying a white man would lead to the Osage's demise. Molly walks away without saying anything. Anna later arrives drunk and attempts to sit on Byron's lap, but he pushes her away, causing Anna to become enraged and slap Byron. Molly helps to calm Anna, but when she sees Byron blatantly flirting with a maid, she also became angry. Ernest and Molly intervene to break up the brawl. As Anna reached for a gun, Ernest quickly disarms her and pushes Byron out of the house. While Molly holds on to Anna, attempting to calm her down. The next day, Anna and Byron reunited and left together. This was Molly's final interaction with Anna before learning of her terrible demise. Molly goes to see Anna, and Ernest comforts her as she sobs at the sight of her murdered sister. The body of another Osage man is discovered the same day, and both killings were judged homicides. Following their deaths, Molly called a conference and announced a reward for information leading to the arrest of her sister's killer. King increased the reward by $1,000 and encouraged anyone with information to contact him. Mr. McBride was asked by the Tribal Council to travel to Washington, D.C., and meet with the Indian Affairs Commission to request assistance in the inquiry. Nevertheless, he was fatally murdered. Ernest and Molly met with William Burns, the talented private investigator hired by Molly to look into her sister's death. The detective discovered that Bill Smith had been conducting his own investigations during the course of the investigation. Furthermore, it was found that Anna was pregnant at the time of her death, although no other details were given. Ernest has been discreetly observing Molly and sharing all of the detective's findings with King, unbeknownst to her. In another incident, a group of men destroys Anna's tomb and steal all of her jewels. Ernest knew the offenders were directed by a man named Blackie. He confronts Blackie to pressure him into a scheme to kill his wife's sister, Rita, in exchange for an insurance payoff via car theft. However, before the plan could be carried out, Blackie is arrested. King, enraged, calls Ernest and scolds him for allowing the problem to grow to the point where Molly hires an investigator. Ernest is chastised by King for failing to maintain control over his family. William Burns is about to enter his room when two men pull him inside and savagely assault him. Molly received no additional information about the detective's whereabouts after he unexpectedly left. Ernest and King asked Henry Grammer for help in fulfilling the alleged mission left by Blackie. AC, an explosives expert, was proposed by Henry. Doctors responding to Molly's diabetes paid a visit to the Buckhart's home to provide her with an insulin shot. Molly, on the other hand, refused the therapy, leaving Ernest with no choice but to ask the doctors to leave while he used the insulin kit. Ernest tried to talk to Molly after the physicians left, but she grew upset, which irritated Ernest and led to an argument. Molly eventually agreed to let Ernest give it a shot. Ernest then soothed and comforted her, ensuring that she would not be harmed. Meanwhile, another Osage member, Henry Roan, became ill, leading King to offer aid, which perplexed Ernest. King revealed that he was the beneficiary of Roan's life insurance policy and that he required Henry to live for a few months longer. Ernest was astonished when King disclosed that Henry was Molly's first husband. Lizzie, on the other hand, was rapidly deteriorating in health with each passing day until she died. Molly told King about a private detective she had hired during supper. Ernest and Byron had murdered the investigator, unbeknownst to her. However, King speculated that the investigator may have vanished after receiving the cash. Following this revelation, Ernest and Molly disclose Molly's pregnancy, despite King's displeasure with the news. Ernest pushes John into a scheme to make Henry's death appear to be self-kill. Following their meeting, they routinely socialize by drinking and spending time together. They eventually meet in a remote spot, where John fatally shoots Henry. Later, John met with Ernest to certify the task's accomplishment, handing over the gun he used to murder Henry before leaving. Ernest and King had a disagreement about Henry's death, which was seen as murder rather than self-kill. Despite King's orders for Ernest to track down AC and carry out the plan, Ernest approached John instead. An explosion occurs one night when the Burkhart family is sleeping. Molly goes outside to check on the kids as Ernest assesses the situation. He discovers that the exploding house belonged to the Smiths and that Molly's sister, Rita, died along with her husband and a housekeeper. As the others attend to Rita's body, Ernest remains stunned. He goes home, exhausted, to find his family waiting for him. Molly gives out a heartbreaking scream of despair when she realizes her sister had died. Following Rita's death, Molly travels to Washington, D.C., to seek aid in the investigation of the Osage killings. Unbeknownst to Molly, her failing health was the result of poison provided by Ernest and King, with the complicity of the doctors she had trusted to help her recover. Ernest brings Molly comfort as he administers another insulin injection while she lies weak on her bed. A tap at the door soon revealed a visitor, Tom White from the United States. Ernest found that the tribal council had requested assistance from the United States government, prompting the dispatch of operatives from the United States. The Osage killings will be attended by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Ernest advises the agent that Molly is resting after receiving her diabetic medicine and offers to visit on Friday if the agent wishes to talk with her. Panicked, Ernest seeks the king to inform his uncle of the presence of the Bureau of Investigation agents. The king, on the other hand, is in the midst of a feast. Unaware that they are being watched, King suggests that Ernest calm down and take a seat before excusing himself. The following day, King goes to the insurance agency to claim Henry Roan's insurance money, but his claim is denied. Despite utilizing his influence to frighten the insurance agency employee, King's attempts were futile, leaving him with little alternative but to leave in a rage. The Shawn brothers are questioned by the agents regarding the method of exhuming Anna's body, which the brothers claimed was part of Indian culture. Meanwhile, Tom White approaches King to interview him, but King declines, noting the inappropriateness of their current position. The agency consents to a later meeting with King. Blackie, a man hired by King, attempted to rob a bank and was later captured by police. Despite this, King continued to support Osage projects in an effort to preserve a friendly relationship with the Osage people. Fearing possible exposure, King decides to terminate several of his hired men, specifically A.C. Kirby and his partner, Henry Grammer, who were responsible for the Smiths' home explosion. A.C. was killed when he and Henry attempted to loot a business. Henry managed to flee but subsequently crashed his car. Simultaneously, agents from the Bureau of Investigation began their inquiry, focusing specifically on Henry Roan's murder. They gradually became aware of the recurring presence of King, Ernest, and Byron, and their names began to appear in their observations. Byron and Kelsey Morrison were present with Anna on the night she died, according to further inquiry. After a thorough investigation, the agents apprehended Morrison, who decided to assist the authorities. On King's Ranch, a fire broke out, coinciding with an occurrence in which an agent dressed as an insurance salesperson sold a fire policy. This raised questions about King's possible involvement in several fraudulent insurance policies. Ernest gets increasingly paranoid as the weight of his past wrongdoings weighs down on him. He purposely taints his wine and ingested it while interfering with his wife's insulin by adding poison. He then provides insulin to his wife before collapsing. Ernest is apprehended and interrogated by the agents, but he remains mute. When a handcuffed Blackie enters the room, Ernest seeks a private conversation, which the agents granted. During their conversation, Blackie advises Ernest to confess for the sake of his family. Tom White tried to convince Ernest to speak up, saying that he was being used because of his fragility. Ernest eventually gave in, wanting to return home and see his wife. Tom White then asked Ernest if he knew who had murdered Henry Roan. When John is arrested, he discovers that Ernest was the one who contacted the authorities, prompting him to confess. Two agents paid a visit to Molly and were astounded to see her declining health. Recognizing Molly was on the verge of death, the agents hurried her to the hospital for immediate medical attention. Meanwhile, King surrendered voluntarily but maintained his innocence. Following that, Ernest is escorted into a car by Tom White. Tom White stated that if Ernest agreed to testify, they would not bring charges against him. While Molly was on the mend, King's demise was on the horizon. Blackie confesses everything he knew to the agents, disclosing vital information and supplying enough proof for King's arrest. When Ernest took the witness stand in court, his ostensible lawyer, Hamilton, demands that he needs to talk to Ernest, but Ernest has no idea if Hamilton is his lawyer because they have never met. The Osage Council is enraged by this. Ernest is taken to see Molly after the initial trial, who is showing signs of improvement. Molly is present at the subsequent trial and hears Morrison explain how she and Byron killed Anna Brown on King's orders, displaying no remorse for his actions. After the second trial, one of Molly and Ernest's children dies of whooping cough. Tom White went to Ernest's prison cell to deliver the awful news. Ernest shouts in despair at learning of his child's death. Ernest chose to testify and confess everything after witnessing his child's burial. During the third trial, Ernest admitted to being the mastermind behind the Osage killings. He confirms their intention to kill every member of Molly's family in order to get their riches. Despite this strategy, Ernest states that he married Molly because he truly loved her. Molly confronts Ernest about the poisoning, but he refuses to confess, prompting Molly to leave him. The Shawn brothers, who were accused of giving Ernest poison to mix with Molly's insulin and of being involved in other alleged killings, escaped punishment owing to a lack of evidence. Byron, on the other hand, did not serve any prison time due to a hung jury. William Hale is sentenced to life in prison but maintains his innocence. In 1947, he was released on parole due to excellent behavior, apparently attributed to buying politicians for his release. Though barred from setting foot in Oklahoma, he visited his family. He went away at the age of 87 at an Arizona nursing home. Likewise, Ernest is sentenced to life imprisonment but was granted a pardon years later. He returned to Osage County and lived in a trailer park with his brother Byron. Molly remarries after divorcing Ernest. Tragically, she died of diabetes in 1937 at the age of 50. She was buried with her family, which included her parents, sisters, and daughter.